Hello, traveler. Come here closer. Before we begin, settle in. Let the room around you fade. Let the fire in your mind burn low and steady. You're listening to Campfire Night Stories. If these slow journeys into the past help you rest, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and return again on another quiet night. Now, let the story begin. He had been thinking about the house for a long time before the first stone was ever placed. Not thinking in words, not in plans drawn on parchment, but in the quiet way a man thinks while walking the same path each morning, while stepping over the same roots, while hearing the same birds lift from the hedges. The thought followed him without urgency, like a shadow that never rushed ahead. He was no longer young, but not yet old. His hands were strong, though already marked by years of work. When he closed them, the memory of tools was always there, the weight of wood, the resistance of earth, the slow give of soil under pressure. He lived now in a borrowed space, a corner of another man's house, warm enough, dry enough, but never truly his. At night, when the fire dimmed and breathing filled the darkness, he would lie awake and listen, not for danger, only for the sense of where he was. And each night, the same understanding returned to him. This place would not hold a family, so the thought of the house remained. It returned to him at dawn, when the world was pale and undecided. It stayed with him as he worked the fields. It followed him home, quiet and patient. It did not demand action. It waited until the time felt right. And one morning, without ceremony, the waiting ended. He rose before the others. The air was cool, heavy with mist. The ground held the night's cold. He stood still for a long moment, listening not outward, but inward, and then he knew, not with excitement, not with fear, only with certainty. It was time to begin. The land he chose lay just beyond the settled edge of the village, not far enough to feel alone, not close enough to feel watched. It was a modest place, a gentle rise in the ground, sheltered slightly from the strongest winds. Grass grew thin there, interrupted by patches of bare earth and stone. He walked the boundary slowly, step by step, as though the land itself needed to learn the shape of his movement. He returned the next day, and the next. Each time, he stood a little longer. There was no rush. When he finally brought tools, the sounds felt different here. The strike of iron against soil carried softly. Birds did not scatter far. The earth accepted his presence without resistance. He began by clearing only what was necessary. A small space, nothing wide, nothing ambitious. The work was repetitive, steady, almost meditative. Lift, strike, clear, breathe. As the hours passed, the shape of the ground changed, though only slightly, enough to be noticed by someone who had been there from the beginning. That night, as he lay down to sleep, his body was heavy, his thoughts simple. The image of the place returned to him, not as it might be someday, but exactly as it was now, bare, open, waiting. He slept easily. In the days that followed, the routine settled into him. He worked the land at the same hour each morning. He stopped at the same time. He ate, rested, returned. The work did not exhaust him. It grounded him. Each movement felt connected to the one before it, like links in a long chain stretching backward through time. When the first wooden posts were brought, he handled them with care. He did not hurry to place them. He measured with his eye, then measured again by pacing the distance with his feet. The space between them mattered. The space would become walls. The walls would hold warmth. The warmth would hold life. When he finally set the first post into the earth, he paused with both hands resting against it. The wood was rough, solid, real. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. Others came, as he knew they would. Not all at once. Not loudly. One at a time. They appeared, offering help without ceremony. A shared task. A familiar rhythm. No debt spoken aloud, yet all understood. Together, they worked without urgency. The frame rose slowly, day by day. No moment stood apart from another. Each was part of the same long motion. When evening came, the unfinished structure stood quietly against the darkening sky. It did not yet look like a house. It looked like intention made visible. He returned home, tired, but calm. His body remembered the day without pain. His thoughts did not race ahead. They remained where they were. Exactly where they needed to be. At night, he began to dream differently. Not of the future, not of what the house would become, but of the work itself. The weight of wood, the feel of earth, the slow certainty of things being placed where they belonged. And each morning, when he woke, the dream did not fade. It waited for him just beyond the edge of the village, patient and unchanged. The house had begun, and it would take its time. The days began to resemble one another so closely that time itself seemed to soften. Morning no longer announced itself with urgency. It arrived quietly, the way light does when it seeps rather than strikes. He woke before it fully reached the ground, before shadows loosened their hold on the earth. His body rose without thought, the same movements, the same pause before standing. Outside, the air was cool and still. Sounds carried far, but nothing demanded attention. He walked the familiar path toward the rising frame of the house, his steps steady, unhurried, exactly as they had been the day before. The structure waited for him. It did not feel unfinished. It felt patient. He began where he had left off, hands moving through remembered motions. The work did not require planning now. His body knew what came next. He lifted wood, he fitted it. He pressed woven branches into place, layer after layer, forming walls that slowly thickened. The rhythm was constant. Press, adjust, step back. Press again. Hours passed unnoticed. When he stopped, it was not because he was tired, but because the light had shifted and told him it was time. He stood inside the frame for a long while afterward, unmoving. Wind passed through the open spaces, brushing against his arms. The ground beneath his feet was firm, familiar. This space already held him. The walls grew denser as days folded into one another. Mud and straw filled the gaps, smoothed by hand, then smoothed again. The texture changed slowly under his palms, from wet and yielding to dry and solid. There was satisfaction in that change. He did not speak while he worked. Words would have disrupted the rhythm. Silence allowed the mind to rest, to follow the same gentle path again and again. Sometimes others joined him. Sometimes they did not. It made little difference. The work continued either way, unchanged in its pace. By late afternoon, the walls no longer let the wind pass freely. Inside the structure, the air felt stiller, quieter, sound softened. Even footsteps seemed to settle more gently. That evening, He sat just inside the opening that would become the door. The sun slipped lower, painting the inside of the walls with muted gold. He remained there until the light faded entirely. For the first time, the space held darkness. When the roof began, the days slowed further. Each bundle of thatch was placed with care, not because he feared mistakes, but because repetition itself demanded attention. The work rose above him gradually, narrowing the sky into a smaller and smaller shape. The sound inside changed. Wind moved overhead instead of through. Rain, when it came, struck the roof and moved away, leaving the interior dry and calm. He stood beneath it and listened. Nothing else mattered in that moment. The first night spent inside the house arrived without ceremony. There was no door yet, no hearth, only shelter. He lay on the packed earth floor, wrapped in familiar cloth, and stared upward. The roof loomed above him, dark and close, but steady. The night sounds reached him faintly now, softened by the walls. His breathing slowed. Sleep came easily. From that night on, the house began to shape his days as much as he shaped it. He returned to it each morning, not as a project, but as a place that responded to his presence, that held warmth longer each day, that remembered the fire once it was finally lit in the center of the room. Smoke curled upward, escaping through small gaps. The beams darkened gradually. The smell of fire settled into the walls. He welcomed it. The house was becoming familiar. As weeks passed, small additions appeared. A rough bench along one wall, a storage space for tools, a place for water. Each change was minor. None disrupted the whole. There was no moment when the house was declared finished. It simply continued to exist. And so did he. At night, lying near the low fire, he listened to the familiar sounds. Wood settling, embers shifting, the distant movement of animals beyond the walls. These sounds did not alert him, they reassured him. This place held. This place endured. The seasons moved quietly around the house, but inside, time felt slower, more deliberate. Each day returned to the same pattern, the same gentle arc from light to dark. And in that repetition, the house began to do what it was meant to do. It allowed rest. The first night the others joined him. Nothing changed in a way that could be pointed to. The walls did not move. The roof did not settle differently. The fire burned as it always had. And yet the space felt fuller. They entered quietly, carrying only what was necessary. There was no announcement, no moment of arrival that stood apart from the rest of the evening. They simply stepped inside, lowered their things, and sat. The house accepted them without resistance. The fire was small. It did not need to be large. The warmth gathered close to the ground, spreading slowly, touching knees and hands first. Shadows climbed the walls and stayed there, unmoving. They ate in silence, not because words were forbidden, but because none were required. The day had been long, the work familiar. Each of them carried the same tired calm. When they lay down to sleep, it was without ceremony. Blankets were placed. Straw was adjusted. Bodies found positions that felt right. Breathing filled the space. The nights that followed grew predictable. Fire. Darkness. Sleep. Sometimes the wind pressed against the walls. Sometimes rain traced slow paths down the roof. The sounds entered the house softly, stripped of urgency. Children slept nearest the warmth. Their movements were small, restless at first, then still. He listened to their breathing until it matched his own. The house held them together. Days passed in quiet repetition. He woke early, as always. The house was cool in the morning, the fire reduced to ash and memory. He stirred it gently, coaxing heat back into the space. Light entered slowly through the doorway, touching the floor, climbing the walls inch by inch. Dust moved through it, unhurried. Outside, the world continued as it always had. Inside, the rhythm remained unchanged. Work. Return. Rest. Small repairs became part of the routine. A patch of wall smoothed again. A bundle of thatch tightened. These tasks did not interrupt the day. They were the day. Children learned the shape of the house by moving through it in the same patterns, over and over. They knew where the light fell in the morning, where the shadows gathered at night, where it was warmest when the fire burned low. The house taught them without words. As weeks folded into months, the space grew quieter still. Not because there was less life inside, but because everything had found its place. Tools rested where they belonged. Water sat where hands expected it to be. The fire burned at the same size each night. There were no surprises. And in that sameness, comfort deepened. At night, he lay awake sometimes, not from worry, but from awareness. He listened to the house, to the small sounds that meant nothing was wrong. The faint settling of wood, the distant call of an animal far from the walls. Each sound was familiar. Each sound meant safety. The seasons changed beyond the walls, but inside, the house held its own time. Days lengthened, days shortened, the fire adjusted, blankets came and went. The structure remained. So did the rhythm. Sleep came easily now. Not sudden. Not heavy. Just steady. And as he drifted off, the thought returned, not as a plan, not as effort, but as quiet understanding. This house was doing what it was meant to do. It was holding a life. The years did not announce themselves. They arrived quietly, one after another, settling into the house the same way smoke settled into the beams. Slowly, evenly, without asking permission. The house changed, but only in ways that required patience to notice. The walls grew smoother where hands brushed them each day. The floor hardened beneath countless steps. The fire left its mark in darkened wood and familiar scent. Nothing felt new, and that was the comfort of it. Each morning followed the same gentle pattern. He woke before the others, before the house fully remembered the warmth of the night. The air was cool, still. He moved carefully, stepping around sleeping forms, lifting embers back to life with practiced ease. The fire answered him softly. Light crept in through the doorway as it always had, stretching across the floor in a slow, predictable line. Dust drifted. The house breathed. He sat for a while, before beginning the day, hands resting on his knees, listening. Not for danger, just listening. There was no need to hurry. Outside, work continued as it always had. Inside, the house waited. When he returned in the afternoon, the children were already there. They moved through the space without thought, their paths worn invisible but precise. They knew where to sit, where to lie, where to be quiet. The house shaped them as much as they shaped it. Repairs came and went. A section of wall, softened by rain, was pressed firm again. A loosened bundle of thatch was retied. These acts did not feel like maintenance. They felt like care. The house accepted it all. There was no frustration in the work, only familiarity. Night settled gently. The fire burned low and steady. Meals were simple. Silence was common, but never heavy. Each person carried the same understanding this place held them, and would continue to do so if they treated it well. Sleep arrived, gradually. Breathing slowed. Bodies relaxed. The house listened. Sometimes, during the deepest part of the night, he would wake briefly, not fully, just enough to be aware of where he was. The ceiling close above. The steady warmth. The quiet certainty of walls around him. He always fell back asleep without effort. The passing of time became something felt rather than counted. Children grew taller without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened. Tools wore smooth. The fire pit deepened slightly with use. The doorframe bore marks from years of hands passing through. These changes were not discussed. They were simply known. The house stood through rain and wind, through cold seasons and warm ones. It held heat when it could. It let it go when it had to. Nothing was forced. The rhythm continued. Day. Night. Fire. Sleep. As the years moved on, the house felt less like something built and more like something that had always been there, as though it had risen naturally from the ground, shaped by time rather than hands. And in many ways, it had. The nights grew quieter as routines deepened. Even the smallest sounds, a shift in the fire, a breath, the settling of wood felt expected, reassuring. The house did not surprise them anymore. And that was its greatest gift. He lay awake one night, listening as he always did, and realized there was nothing he needed to remember to do, nothing left unfinished, nothing waiting. The house required only presence now, and that was enough. The children did not grow suddenly. They grew the way the house had been built, slowly, in small, almost invisible changes that only became clear when looking back. One day, a head brushed closer to a beam. Another day, a voice sounded deeper in the evening quiet. The house adjusted without effort. Sleeping places shifted slightly. Tools were moved higher. The fire was built a little larger on colder nights. Nothing required discussion. Each change happened when it needed to happen. The house allowed it. Mornings remained gentle. He woke before the light, as he always had. The house was still, holding the last warmth of the night. He stirred the fire and waited for it to answer, watching as a faint glow returned to the embers. The smell of smoke was familiar, comforting. It belonged to the place now. He sat for a while, listening to the soft sounds of sleep around him, breathing, a shift of weight, nothing more. The day could wait. Outside, the world continued to turn through seasons, but inside, the house kept its steady pace. The walls held warmth longer in winter now, thickened by years of care. In summer, the interior stayed cool, shadowed, and calm. Children came and went through the doorway, their movements sure and unthinking. They knew the house by feel, by sound, by memory. It was the center of their world. Evenings settled into a rhythm so familiar, it no longer felt like a routine. The fire was lit at the same hour. Food was prepared, and eaten in the same place. Conversation came and went, sometimes present, sometimes absent, never forced. Afterward, they rested. The house held the quiet easily. At night, sleep came without resistance. The sounds outside were distant and unimportant. Wind pressed against the walls and moved on. Rain fell and passed. The roof remained steady. Inside, the air was warm and still. The house did its work. Years folded into one another. The marks of living deepened. The floor was smooth where feet passed daily. The doorframe was worn by countless hands. The beams overhead were dark with smoke and time. These signs were not flaws. They were proof. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, he would think not deeply, not with effort, about how long the house had stood, how many nights it had held them, how many mornings it had greeted him in the same way. The thought brought no pride, only calm. The children slept easily now, their breathing slow and even. They did not know the house as something new or fragile or uncertain. To them, it had always been there, and so it felt permanent. The fire burned low. The house rested. Time moved on, gently, without drawing attention to itself. The slowing came so gradually that it was almost impossible to notice. His body still woke before the light, but it took a little longer to rise. Not because of pain, but because there was no need to hurry. The house was steady. The fire would answer when asked. Nothing depended on speed anymore. He sat longer in the quiet mornings, hands resting where they always had, listening to the same familiar sounds. The house made them gently, the soft settling of wood, the faint movement of air, the distant life beyond the walls. Everything sounded as it should. The work outside the house changed, but the work inside remained the same. Repairs were smaller now, more precise, a touch here, a smoothing there. He knew exactly where the house would ask for attention before it asked. The walls responded as they always had. The roof held. The floor remained firm beneath his feet. The house did not feel old. It felt complete. Days passed in a way that no longer invited counting. Meals came and went. Firelight rose and faded. Sleep arrived easily, stayed deeply, and left gently. The nights felt shorter, the days softer. Children were no longer children, though the house still held their presence. Their places remained, their marks stayed, the space remembered them, even when they were not there. Memory lived quietly in the walls. Sometimes he stood alone inside the house in the late afternoon, when the light angled low through the doorway. Dust moved slowly in the air. The fire was not yet lit. The space felt wide and calm. He would rest his hand against the wall and remain there. No thoughts followed. At night, lying near the fire, he listened to the familiar sounds with deeper attention now, not because he feared their absence, but because he knew their value. The steady breath of the house, the gentle crackle of embers, the quiet certainty of shelter. Each sound arrived, then passed. The seasons continued their slow turning outside. Inside, the house kept the same temperature of feeling, warm, holding, unchanging in the ways that mattered. The roof shed rain as it always had. The walls kept out the wind. The fire warmed the center of the space. Nothing demanded improvement. Sleep grew heavier, fuller. Dreams were simple now, not of the future, not of the past, only of familiar movements, repeated endlessly, without effort. Waking and sleeping felt closer together, like two parts of the same long rest. One evening, as the fire burned low, he noticed the quiet more than usual. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace, the kind that settles when everything is where it belongs. The house stood. The night passed. Time no longer felt like something moving forward. It felt like something resting. There was no moment when he realized the house no longer needed him. The understanding came the same way. Everything else had come quietly, without asking for attention. One evening felt like all the others. The fire burned low. The walls held the warmth. The roof rested above, unchanged. He sat near the hearth, breathing slowly, hands loose in his lap. The light moved gently across the floor, then withdrew. Shadows returned to their familiar places. Nothing waited to be done. He slept longer now. Not from weakness, but from ease. Sleep found him quickly and stayed with him, deep and steady. When he woke, the house greeted him in the same way it always had, with stillness, with patience, with certainty. The morning light entered slowly, touching the floor, the walls, the beams, darkened by years of smoke. Dust drifted through the air, unhurried. The house remembered everything. He moved less, but noticed more. The way sound softened inside the walls. The way warmth gathered near the fire, even when it was small. The way the roof answered rain with a low, steady rhythm. Each detail felt complete. Sometimes others were there. Sometimes he was alone. The house made no distinction. It held space the same way it always had, evenly, without preference. Even when empty, it was never vacant. The years outside continued to pass, but inside, time had learned to slow itself. Days unfolded gently, without sharp edges. Nights arrived and settled without demand. The house stood as it always had. Not new, not old, simply present. One night, lying near the dying fire, he listened longer than usual, not because he expected something to change, but because everything sounded exactly right. The soft settling of wood, the faint breath of air, the quiet weight of the roof above. He closed his eyes. The house remained. It would remain through other nights, through other mornings, through lives moving in and out of its space, each one leaving a trace too small to notice at first. It would continue to hold warmth, continue to soften sound, continue to offer rest. And somewhere within its walls, the rhythm would stay the same. Fire, darkness, sleep. Let the fire burn low now. Let the house rest. Let the night carry you gently onward. You've been listening to Campfire Night Stories. If this quiet journey helped you drift, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and return again when the night is long and the fire is low. Good night. You are welcome here. See you next time.